For this video, we're going to take a look at ratios and proportions. So we're going to basically step back a little bit and review some things that you've probably seen before. We're going to start with ratios. So a ratio is a comparison of two quantities. And normally there are a couple different ways that we can write a ratio. The most common way that you'll probably see a ratio written is as a fraction. The most common way that you'll probably see a ratio written is as a fraction. We can also write it using a colon where we have A colon B, so quantity A and then compared to quantity B. And then we can also write it out in words where we're comparing A to B. And the important thing to keep in mind here is that ratios can be reduced. So most of the time, you're not going to see the ratio in its complete form. Most of the time when they give you a ratio, it will have been reduced. So for example, if we have a music store that has 40 trumpets, 39 clarinets, 24 violins, 51 flutes, and 16 trombones, we want to take a look at the ratios. So we're going to take a look at ratio of trumpets to violins. So there are 40 trumpets and 24 violins. And we should notice pretty quickly that that is something that we actually can simplify or reduce. So if I look at 40 and 24, I can take an 8 out of both. So if I divide both by 8, I'm going to get 5 to 3. So for every 5 trumpets, there are 3 violins. Now, there were many more, right? There were more than 5 trumpets and 3 violins, but that's what it was reduced down to. All right, so we can do the same thing with flutes and clarinets. There were 51 flutes and 39 clarinets. So now with this one, when we have 51 flutes and 39 clarinets, if we go ahead and try to reduce that one, it looks like we can take a 3 out of both of those. And so we're going to end up with 17 flutes for every 13 clarinets. Now again, the numbers were much bigger, but we reduced them down. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and try the last two in here in this section, number 3 and number 4. And then we'll talk about extended ratios. An extended ratio is again a comparison, but this time it's a comparison of 2 or more quantities. So this time it could be a comparison of 2 things or 3 things or 4 things. And extended ratios are usually written with the colon. So we're comparing A to B to C. All right, so let's take a look at how this works and how this will help us. In the problems down below, we have number 5, which says the ratio of 2 complementary angles is 3 to 7. Find the measure of both of the angles. Well, complementary angles are angles, again, that add up to 90 degrees. So if I draw a quick little picture here of 2 complementary angles, and then I look at my ratio of 3 to 7, if I label the smaller one 3 and the larger one 7, that just doesn't make sense. I know that the 2 angles have to add up to 90. Complementary angles have to add up to 90. So one of them isn't 3 and the other one isn't 7. They don't add up to 90. So what that tells me is that that ratio should be much bigger. Those numbers were originally much bigger, but somewhere along the way they were reduced. They were reduced down to 3 to 7. So when you reduce something, you take a common factor out of both pieces. So there was something that we took away from 7, and there was something that we took away from the 3 when we reduced them. I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to call it X. So now I know that there's 7 times something and 3 times something, and that when I add them together, they should equal 90 degrees. So 7 times something and 3 times that same thing should equal 90 degrees. And so now I have a little equation that I can solve. And when I go through and solve it, X turns out to be 9. Now if I go back to the problem, it says find the measure of both angles. So the angles are going to be 3 times 9, or 27 degrees, and 7 times 9, or 63 degrees, and now I have 2 angles that are complementary. All right, the next one, same thing, but dealing with supplementary angles. So supplementary angles should add up to 180 degrees, so you can go ahead and try that one. And then the 2 problems down below, both are dealing with angles of a triangle. So I'll start the first one out for you. In this first problem, we have the angles of a triangle are in the ratio 4 to 7 to 9. So if I go through and label them 4, 7, and 9, again, something should kind of go off in your mind that says, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because all the angles in a triangle, all three angles in a triangle, better add up to 180, and 4 plus 7 plus 9 is not even close. So there was something that was taken away from each one of those numbers. I need to figure out what that was before I can find the measure of the angles. So again, all three angles are going to add up to 180 degrees. Okay, and then go ahead and try the other one also. All right, when you turn your paper over, there are two more extended ratio problems on the top. Those are both dealing with perimeter, so hopefully you can set those up, solve those. And now we're going to start to talk about a proportion. So a proportion is an equation that states that two fractions are equal. So it's an equation that states that two fractions are equal. A proportion, is usually written as something like a over b is equal to some other fraction like c over d. So it's an equation that shows that two fractions are equal. And when we solve a proportion, we usually will cross multiply. So in our proportion up above, if we cross multiply a times d, it should equal the same thing as we get when we multiply b times c. Okay, and proportions are something that you've been doing for quite a while, but I will walk you through just a couple of them. If we take a look at number 11, when we go to cross multiply, 2 times x is going to give us 2x, and 7 times 4 is going to give us 28. Now we have a little equation that we can solve, divide both sides by 2, and x turns out to be 14. All right, if we jump down to number 13, in number 13, if we multiply 19 times x minus 1, remember that we have to multiply the 19 times the x, and we also have to multiply the 19 times the 1. We have to distribute there. So when we multiply 19 times x, we get 19x, and 19 times negative 1 is a negative 19. And then when we cross multiply in the opposite direction, we get 6 times 13, which is going to be 78. All right, and now we can go ahead and we can try to solve this. We have to add 19 to both sides. So we get that 19x is equal to 97, and then we can go through and divide both sides by 19, and we end up getting something, it's going to turn out to be a decimal in this case. We'll round it. Let's say that it's going to be about 5.1. And again, we did have to round that. All right, so go ahead and try the other ones. When you come to class tomorrow, you should have this paper complete. I will collect it from you, and then there are a few problems for you to try in Math Excel.